Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the NIFA Office of Civil Rights and Equal Opportunity Limited English Proficiency LEP webinar. I would like to thank you all for attending this training. I am Sandra Tucker, an Equal Opportunity Specialist, and will be your trainer for today. As I stated, this training is on limited English proficiency. The goals for today's training is to provide an overview of a LEP program, review USDA LEP guidance, describe the elements of conducting a LEP needs assessment, as well as discuss developing and implementing a language access plan. To provide some background on the LEP program, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order on August 11, 2000, providing legal authority for improving access to services for persons with limited English proficiency. This executive order requires federal agencies to examine their services and activities, identifying any needs for services to those who may be limited English proficient. Federal agencies are to develop and implement a system to provide LEP persons with meaningful access to programs and services. LEP falls under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which promises equal access to federally assisted programs and activities. On the same day the executive order was signed by the President, the Department of Justice issued an opinion that became the standard for other agencies in establishing their LEP policies. USDA departmental regulation concerning their LEP policies was developed in June of 2013. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the legal authority for LEP. Section 601 of Title VI states, "No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." Again, Title VI provides the legal authority for departmental regulations to enforce LEP guidance. 28 CFR for LEP states that where a significant number or proportion of the population eligible to be served or likely to be directly affected by a federally assisted program needs service or information in a language other than English in order effectively to be informed of or to participate in the program, the recipient shall take reasonable steps, considering the scope of the program and the size and concentration of such population, to provide information in appropriate languages to such persons. This requirement applies with regard to written material of the type which is ordinarily distributed to the public. So you must consider limited English proficient persons when providing services or activities that are usually provided to the public. USDA's LEP policy, as established within a departmental regulation, is to ensure no person is subject to prohibited discrimination in USDA conducted programs and activities. and that failing to provide meaningful access to LEP persons may violate this policy and Title VI. Those who must comply include all organizations, state or local agencies, private institutions or organizations, or any public or private individual receiving federal financial assistance. They all have a responsibility to take reasonable steps to ensure LEP persons have meaningful access. This financial assistance can be in the form of grants, loans, use of equipment, training, the detail of federal personnel, or surplus property. So recipients and subrecipients of federal monies must ensure limited English proficient persons are not excluded from programs, don't experience delays in service, don't experience denial of service, receive care based on accurate and complete information. Who is a person with limited English proficiency? Most people living in the United States read, write, speak, and understand English, but there are many whom English is not their primary language. Of the 60 million individuals, foreign and US born, it is estimated that at least 40% are limited English proficient, meaning according to the Census Bureau's definition, speaking English is less than very well. So if these individuals have a limited ability to read, write, speak, or understand English, they are considered limited English proficient. As I stated, LEP falls under Title VI. So to be in compliance, federally funded entities must ensure that LEP persons have meaningful access. Meaningful access means providing language assistance that results in accurate and effective communication at no cost to the participant. Conducting a thorough assessment is key to determining just how extensive your program should be. This is where you will determine what non-English languages may be encountered in your program, as well as the number of LEP persons eligible. Recipients of federal financial assistance are obligated to reduce language barriers that can interfere with meaningful access of LEP persons to important benefits, programs, information, and services. So beginning with an individualized assessment that balances these four factors can be essential to addressing language barriers. First, you will assess the number of proportions of LEP persons eligible for your services or likely to be encountered within the program. Some numbers within a program may have many LEP persons, while others may not have any. Second, you want to assess the frequency LEP individuals come in contact with the program. Third, you really want to assess the nature and importance of the program, activity, or service provided compared to the person's lives. Is it critical? Is it something related to disaster preparedness, food, or water? Or is it just something recreational and for entertainment? Four, what are the resources available to the grantee and recipient? And what is the cost? Some small recipients or small business recipients, smaller local communities compared to larger universities may have less funds to dedicate to certain programs. Another element developed from the Department of Justice opinion was guidance to require agencies to develop a LAP plan or language access plan. A LAP can be essential because it makes it easier to addressing the four-factor analysis and provides strategies to improve language access. A LAP usually has 5 steps. First, you want to identify LEP individuals who is needing language assistance. This can be difficult because you need to find out as best as possible how many people need language assistance. What population do you need to serve? How many are there and what languages will or does your plan entail? The next step includes determining how will the language assistance be provided. Will you provide translation services or will you mostly provide documents translated in a particular language? Will there be a need for personnel on the ground providing oral translation? Basically, what language assistance will be involved? Persons needing language assistance have to be informed of the language services you are providing. So you will want to develop strategies for providing notice to LEP persons. Determine how you will let them know your services are available. Otherwise, your service will not be as effective. Staff will then need to be trained on the LEP. The type of training they receive may depend on their job position. For example, a person having day-to-day contact with LEP individuals or those in customer service may need more training compared to those who have little or no participant encounters. Lastly, you need to monitor and update the LEP plan because communities change, customers change, programs change. If your plan is outdated, it will become ineffective as changes happen. In looking at identifying LEP persons who need language assistance, the first 2 factors of the 4-factor analysis require an assessment of the number or proportion of LEP individuals to be served or encountered, and the frequency of these encounters. Basically, how many people are eligible, how many encounters are happening. So this will require recipients to identify LEP persons with whom they have contact. Here are some ways to identify them. Listed here are examples that may or may not be practical to your organization. These are just a few, but certainly there are many more possible examples. Your staff or LEP team may be able to come up with other ways that are more conducive to your organization. One way to determine the language of communication is to use language identification cards. Use I speak cards to invite LEP persons to identify their language need or self-identify. I speak cards can be found on the Census Bureau website. If program participants' records are kept, the language of the LEP person can be included as part of the data collection. Notices also can be posted in locations commonly encountered by potential LEP persons, notifying them of available language assistance services and encouraging them to self-identify. Also, data from the Internet and Census Bureau can provide information on LEP persons within your servicing area. Next, you want your LEP plan to include information about how the language assistance will be provided. You may want to include at least the type of language services available, how staff can obtain those services, how to respond to LEP callers, how to respond to written communication from LEP persons, how to respond to LEP individuals who have in-person contact with staff, and how to ensure the competency of interpreters and translation services. I will talk more about determining the competency of interpreters and language services later during this training. Once it has been determined your organization is going to provide language assistance services, based on the four-factor analysis, you have to inform LEP persons what services are available and that they are free. Notices should be provided in the language LEP persons will understand. You may have to provide notices in more than one language. This could include posting signs in intake areas and other entry points. You want to make sure the notices can be openly seen by the public. If you have an intake area, it is important to ensure there is meaningful access to information and services and that the notices are printed in the appropriate languages needed by the LEP person. Listed here are a few notice examples. Signs placed in intake offices can state that free language assistance is available. The signs should be translated into the most common languages encountered. They should explain how to access language help. Announcements could be, for example, in brochures, booklets, outreach, and recruitment information. These statements should be translated into the most common languages and could be tagged onto the front of the common documents. Also, working with community-based organizations and other stakeholders can aid in informing LEP persons of your services. Using a telephone voicemail menu is another method. So if someone calls in for a service, they get the telephone voicemail menu, which would be in the most common language encountered. It could also provide information about language assistance services available, as well as provide information on how to get these services. Training staff is very important. Staff should know and understand their obligations to provide meaningful access to information and services for LEP persons. An effective LEP plan should include training to ensure staff know about LEP policies and procedures. This is especially true for ground staff working with LEP persons. Staff need to know the policies and procedures to follow for your organization. This includes being trained to work effectively with in-person and on the phone LEP interpreters. Staff need to know how to actually call interpreters. They need to know the number to call, what they may encounter when they call, and what to say to the interpreters in order to get the most appropriate interpreter. This training can be included as part of the orientation for new employees and repeated as needed. Also, it is important to ensure that all employees in public contact positions are properly trained. The more frequent the contact with LEP persons, the greater the need to have more in-depth training. Staff with little or no contact with LEP persons may only need to be aware of the LEP plan and the basis of the plan, or a contact number. The last step includes monitoring and updating the LEP plan. Your organization should, when appropriate, have a process for continuously determining whether new documents, programs, services, and activities need to be accessible for LEP individuals. This is something that can be done daily, monthly, weekly, depending on the program. Also, as part of this step in the process, you should consider whether there are changes in demographics, types of services, or other needs which can be determined during annual reevaluations of the LEP plan. Less frequent reevaluations may be more appropriate when demographics, services, and needs don't change often. One good way to evaluate LEP plans is to seek feedback from the community where the service is being provided. During reviews, you may want to consider assessing changes in current LEP populations in the service area, or populations affected or encountered, the frequency of encounters with LEP groups, the nature and the importance of the activities to LEP persons, the availability of resources, including technological advances or sources of additional resources, and the cost. Also assess whether existing assistance is meeting the needs of LEP persons, as well as determining the level of staff knowledge and understanding of the LEP plan and their ability to implement the plan. Lastly, identify whether sources of assistance are still available and useful. Now, let's look at types of language services. First, we have oral interpretation, which is the listening to someone in one language and then orally translating that language into another language. Some things to consider when using oral interpretation as a language assistant tool include the competence of your interpreters, hiring a bilingual staff when possible, hiring staff interpreters, contracting or having a contractor for interpreters, using telephone interpreter lines, using community volunteers, using family members, friends, and others, and ensuring the competent language service is free for participants. We also have written translation as a language service. So there is oral interpretation and written translation. Written translation is the replacement of a written text from one language, the source language, for example, Spanish or Chinese, into an equivalent written text in another language, the target language, such as English. Things to consider include determining what documents should be translated, determine what languages apply, the competence of the translators, and then you also may want to look at documents that are on websites. Now let's review vital documents. It is important to ensure vital documents are translated into the non-English language of a frequently encountered LEP group, likely to be served or likely to be affected by your program services or activities. A vital document is considered vital if it contains information that is critical for obtaining federal services and/or benefits, or as required by law. Vital documents include applications, consent forms, complaint forms, notices of rights, disciplinary actions, notices advising LEP persons of the availability of free language assistance, written tests that do not assess English language competency, but rather competency for a particular license, a test for a job, a skill in which English competency is not required. Also, letters or notices that require the response from the beneficiary or client are considered vital documents. Lastly, I have some best practices to share that may or may not be conducive to your LEP services and activities. I am sure you have many best practices in which you can share. First, it is a best practice to have strong language access coordination and accountability. This is when you appoint an agency limited English proficiency coordinator, or in a large organization, a working group of individuals from different components to monitor and update the agency's response to LEP needs. You want to monitor agency's compliance by ensuring staff cooperation and accountability. Also, you want to conduct regular trainings on LEP access. All staff should be aware of your agency's LEP plan, especially those who encounter the public. Conducting an effective needs assessment is another best practice that includes figuring out who has LEP needs. You want to survey client behaviors and chart their needs by tracking LEP encounters. Conduct focus groups with client stakeholders and obtain customer feedback via surveys or other methods. You can talk to managers, supervisors, people in contact with the public. They can give you information via their own tracking system. Use the information obtained from client populations to measure language access efforts for priority service and locations. Another best practice is reliable access to disaster and emergency preparedness information. When we're talking about vital documents or when we're talking about vital information that needs to be translated, interpreted, this is a major area of focus. Disaster and emergency preparedness should always be a priority for language access efforts. Efficient resource utilization as a best practice can involve the sharing of resources within and across agencies. Using bilingual employees should be done efficiently and correctly. You need to determine the bilingual employees you have available. You want to avoid assumptions about the competence and willingness of bilingual staff to provide language services. Once you have identified competent and willing bilingual staff, ensure that they are strategically posted. Also, leverage community-based organizations for interpretation and translation assistance, provided that quality control procedures are in place. You don't want to use just any community-based organization. You want to make sure that the ones you are using are helpful, know the community that you're working in, and are able to provide quality interpretation and translation services. Meaningful access to web-based information is another best practice to consider when providing LEP services. This can be difficult because the internet is so fast and websites are always being updated. But non-English web pages should be a priority, not an afterthought. Make them easy to locate and navigate. The non-English language web pages should serve as a one-stop shop for agency information. Web pages should be available at least in Spanish and any other top languages. I want to caution you when using web-based translation services because translations through such services can be inaccurate, so you want to be careful. Consistent enforcement of quality control standards is another best practice. Follow the earlier suggestions. relating to assessing the competence of bilingual staff, interpreters, translators, the accuracy of web-based information and translations in non-English language, and reliance on customer feedback. Avoid improvised approaches when faced with LEP encounters by ensuring the staff is familiar with your LEP plan, as discussed. You want to avoid situations where you are faced with LEP persons and you don't have a plan or know what to do. Have a plan. Don't improvise. Relying on a limited English proficient person's family or friends for interpretation and translation as a general language assistance strategy is usually inappropriate. Generally, family and friends should not be used for language assistance, except for emergencies, because they can conflict the situation. You don't know what competence they have in that language, what they are translating, or if whether or not they are summarizing. There also may be some sort of conflict in which they may not be acting in the best interest of the person or persons they are translating to. You just don't know. So relying on family or friends is more of a worst case scenario in an emergency and not something that you want to do as a best practice. Another best practice to consider is valuing community partnerships. Enlist the cooperation of community and ethnic organizations for interpretation and translation assistance, which could include reviewing translations on non-English web pages for accuracy and tone. Community organizations can help to determine language access priorities by determining the services and information most frequently accessed or in demand by various language communities. Community organizations can help agencies assess the effectiveness of their language access plan by providing honest feedback. They can also be a source of good publicity for an agency's language access efforts by informing LEP communities and other agency services of the manner in which your agency is striving to meet LEP needs. Lastly, another best practice includes effective marketing of language access program. How do you market this program that you now have, these services or activities you are offering? In order to access your services, LEP individuals must know what is available. You want to market language access programs to target communities. These would be the communities resulting from your assessment. So you can attend seminars, symposiums, and community health fairs. You may also want to reach out to ethnic media and your culturally diverse media outlets to inform them of your agency's commitment to language access. These are just a few best practices. As I said before, I'm sure you have many more, and again, please share. This concludes the training on limited English proficiency. A great online resource for this training is www.lep.gov. Also, please send your questions and comments to our agency. Thank you for attending this training.